During World War II, man-portable anti-tank weapons became a priority to develop and modernise, and this led to some strange and sometimes highly effective weapons, and here are a few of my favourites. Firstly came the German Hafthollandung, which translates roughly to handheld hollow charge. This was a magnetic mine developed and deployed for combat by 1942. What's interesting about the development of this weapon is it was made as a reaction to the supposed use of magnetic anti-tank mines by Allied forces. But this was not true, so the Germans basically entered an imaginary arms race through their own paranoia. The mine itself came in several variants, with the most common one being the 3 kg variant, but there were the 2, 3, 5, 8 and 10 kg variants as well, but these were far rarer. The 3 kg mine had 3 magnetic feet that would be used to achieve a lock onto the enemy tank. Even just one foot could achieve this, as each individual foot created 6.8 kilograms of sticking force, meaning if all 3 feet were locked onto a tank, you would need around 20 kilograms of pressure to remove it. Unfortunately, to attach this mine, you needed to get into direct contact with the enemy tank, and during a live combat situation this was near impossible, as accompanying infantry and support would most likely kill the soldier attempting this task. If you did manage to attach the magnetic mine to a tank, it had a penetration power of 110mm, meaning it could penetrate any tank during World War II, and the only armour that could have been saved would have been the front plates of such tanks as the King Tiger and Sherman Jumbo, but their other armour facings would be vulnerable. The internals of the mine was a shaped charge made from PETN and wax, and when clamped onto the tank there was a small gap between the mine and the point of contact to maximise the penetrative power. Unfortunately for the Germans, not a single Allied tank was recorded as being destroyed by the anti-tank mines, and with 553,000 roughly being made, it was a very resource-heavy investment for zero success on the battlefield. Then enters Japan with a primitive yet deadly lunge mine. The lunge mine was a 2-metre wooden pole tipped with a 3 kg explosive charge. To trigger the device, the safety pin would be removed, and it was as simple as the explosive charge making contact with a surface hard enough to detonate it. This would also kill the user, meaning this was a suicide weapon, and would take a very brave and fearless soldier to use. The charge itself could penetrate 150mm of armour, easily capable of destroying any US tank, and as the weapon was to be used in ambush situations, it would normally strike the side armour, which it would defeat with little challenge. And the first encounter of this weapon was in 1944 on Leyte Island, and by the end of the war no recorded kills on enemy tanks were recorded. But one fatality is recorded when an unnamed soldier used the lunge mine as a tent pole, not realising what it was, and it detonated, killing him unfortunately. The Soviet Union had an even stranger plan, but I must say it was definitely out-the-box thinking. Enter the anti-tank dog. Yes, you heard me correctly, I did say anti-tank dog. Known as dog mines, the idea began in the 1930s, as dogs had been used extensively in World War I in a variety of supporting tasks. So how would this work? Well, the dogs had explosives strapped to them, which they would be able to release by biting then pulling a belt or strap, to drop the explosives once they were under the enemy tank. This did not work though, as it was difficult for the dogs to release the explosives, and to simplify the task, the dogs would be used as suicide weapons, with the explosives having a wooden lever that would detonate when the dogs went under the tank and it came into contact with the hull. This was obviously very brutal to the poor animals, and the training was just as harsh, with the dogs being beaten and starved until the Soviets got the desired effect. A truly horrific abuse of these poor animals. In combat, the dogs were not particularly successful for many reasons. Firstly, they were trained with Soviet tanks that used diesel engines, and the Germans used petrol, which caused the dogs to run under the Soviet tanks instead of German ones whilst in combat. Secondly, the dogs were easily spotted and would be shot as soon as the Germans would recognise they were carrying something in their harness. Also, the dogs would frequently get frightened and confused, and often return to the Soviet forces, detonating the charges and in the process killing Soviet soldiers and wounding many. But there were successes, such as at the Battle of Kursk, where 16 anti-tank dogs were deployed and 12 German tanks were destroyed. But these claims might be exaggerated, but there are definitely reports of successes over the war. Unfortunately, anti-tank dogs were still used and trained up until 1996, a real shame, as in my opinion dogs should be left out of combat and only used in supporting roles like casualty rescue. And lastly, the Germans returned with the Panzerwurfmine anti-tank mine. This was an anti-tank dart grenade that they entered combat in 1943 with specialist German anti-tank crews. The design of the weapon was a dart-shaped grenade which, when thrown, stabilising fins would shoot out to help direct the line to the enemy tank. It weighed around 1.3 kilograms and it came in the long and short version, and it contained an 18.5 ounce explosive via a hollow charge, which could penetrate up to 150mm of armour, which meant it was capable of defeating any tank, especially if thrown at a vulnerable spot of the armour. There is very little information on confirmed tank kills, but as hundreds of thousands of these were made, and German anti-tank squads report that the device worked well, we can assume that there must have been some tank kills, and the weapon was fairly reliable and far better received than the magnetic mine. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one. You guys have a fantastic evening.